recording now. So as I talked about, and I'll share my screen to get started. As I talked about, the workshop, the 2-day workshop, was all about power and understanding power. And I think importantly, building a healthy relationship to power, and a relationship to power that is based on kind of like positivity and empowerment. And I'm trying to figure out how to share this. It seems to have put my mind. There we go. Okay, so yeah, a relationship to power which kind of goes deeper than like traditional ways we think about power, as, you know, power being the person in charge, and power being kind of, you know, the person who makes the decisions, the boss. So it was a chance to kind of come together with different people across the organization to kind of think about and learn more about the kind of the baggage that comes along when we're talking about power, and how this kind of comes into play when we're trying to, you know, play with ideas such as like decentralization and movement building and leadership. So we had like 7 people from across different parts of Animal Rebellion representing different super circles and different circles, and also just people who had time to take 2 days out for an in-person workshop. And we had a couple of aims that were presented to us, I guess, at the start of the workshops, which were to develop a shared understanding and literacy around power, to develop ease with our own and others' power and rank, and I'll talk about rank because this is something we learnt about, to get insight into our behaviors and patterns as a group and as individuals, and to develop our vision of what healthy relationships to power in Animal Rebellion looks like. And this kind of would lead to like hopefully developing our own sense of power and agency. So this kind of sense of like an empowering experience. So I think, you know, there's this question of why did we choose to look at power, and why did we choose to put time into making this workshop happen? And I think the main things were that power plays a major role in group dynamics. And this is what causes so much trouble and tension in group. And we all kind of contribute to this. And I think a big part of that is that, yeah, we aren't conscious of power, and we aren't conscious of our own power and others' powers. And when we're not kind of aware, we don't have like understanding around like the positive and negative and just neutral faces of power, we can misuse it or use it badly, unintentionally. And I think another big thing is that it can be difficult to discuss and acknowledge power. So like I said earlier, like power feels like a bit of a scary word. And I know when I'm writing things about Animal Rebellion, I'll often shy away from using the word power and try and find other ways of talking about the same thing. And I think that kind of, you know, all of us kind of have come to Animal Rebellion from different perspectives, but I think a big central thing of why we come to Animal Rebellion is because we see that there is big problems with the world. And I think a lot of that has to do with power and the way power is weaponized. So I think like coming into a workshop on power, feels like there's a bit of anxiety, because it seems like, you know, it's such a powerful word, if you forgive my and it's kind of a big part of everything that we do. So trying to develop like trust and courage and willingness to look at and explore power and its dynamics in our groups, and that's kind of like this framework for healthy collaboration. So what is power? So during the workshop, we were given this definition of power as which is kind of a common description, which is the ability to influence opinions and outcomes, people and or things, and the ability to make things happen. This is kind of an informal definition, but power can often be confused or conflated with authority, and authority is kind of the license to use power. So that's through a formal role or position. So people can have power without authority. I'm going to talk a bit about responsibility as well. And they can also have authority or responsibility without power. They're not one and the same thing. So we focused on informal power. So this is where people hold influence for other reasons, which is beyond their roles and formal authority. I think this is so important because, you know, we can have mandates, we can have structure, But what that sometimes misses is this kind of sense of informal power, how people hold this sense of influence. And there's multiple reasons for this. And I think a big thing that was kind of stressed right at the start of the workshops was that power is neither negative or positive, and it can be used for both constructive and destructive aims. So early on in the workshop, we looked at this, the difference between constructive and destructive uses of power. And I think, like it says on the slide, like some of the really core senses of these is when you're using power constructively, you're supporting the purpose of the group and increasing the group effectiveness. And I think effectiveness, again, is a word that has a lot of baggage attached to it. But when I think of effectiveness, I think of like functioning in the optimum way, or like striving to function to like the way that most accurately like meets a vision. And constructive is also encouraged by and benefiting group members. Destructive, on the other hand, is self-serving and dysfunctional strategies, and it's damaging to the group's purpose. We also learned about coactive or collaborative uses of power and how they differ from coercive or controlling. So coercive and controlling uses of power is kind of where that kind of typical way that we might think of power kind of comes from. So this is, the big boss. This is unconsciously convert and not consented to. So this is power that you like, I guess we use, I'm going to talk about in a sec of the different kinds of coercive power. And it means, it's linked to kind of coercing or non-consensual kind of ways of delivering power. So this is kind of the classic thing of someone telling you what to do because it meets their needs, rather than this opposite, which is this coactive or collaborative, which is conscious, empowering, and encourage. And there's different forms of power which are linked to these different ways of doing power. So if we look at coercive power first, what we learn is there's two main forms of coercive power. There's power over, and this is the power one person or group has over another to enforce decisions upon others and to enforce control. So again, this is the kind of classic version of like authoritarian power that I think, all of us have had experiences with, whether it's in the family or in school or in the workplace. And I think this is the kind of power that most people who come to Animal Rebellion are automatically very wary of, because we can see how damaging and how toxic it is and how it's led to so many of the atrocities in the world. So it's linked to domination and control, and it is based on unequal power. So it's based on one person having more power over the other and using that. And I think something that was really key that we learned was that this, like kind of a big root of this, is that the belief that power is finite, so that it can be held by individuals and that only a certain number of people can have power. So it's a finite resource. So collaborative groups like we try and be, generally trying to eliminate power over or minimize it. But when you do this, you can run into problems, such as accountability. Like if no one's going to hold you to account, then how do we make sure what needs to get done gets done? And how do we make sure that, one or very few amount of people don't just end up doing all the work and burning out? So it's not enough sometimes to just think about we don't want that without thinking about what we want instead. So we also learned about power under, which is this idea of control through weakness. And I think what was really stressed during the workshop was that power under comes from a sense of powerlessness. So it comes from people or like individuals or groups who don't feel that they have power in particular spaces. So this might be, if you're in a room and there's a very dominant leader and, you know that you can't speak up. So instead of doing that, you withdraw participation. And I think, I remember like growing up when I had siblings who were older than me, and, they would kind of be very dominant and very kind of all that. So, but I knew I couldn't kind of fight back or speak up. So instead I would, give them the silent treatment or withdraw. So this is also described as kind of powerless rage, and it's using kind of other means of influencing group outcomes. So this is, you know, linked to trauma, and again, like, it's not saying this is, you know, any of this is kind of negative or positive, but it's saying that this is a kind of a technique that you might see happening in groups where there might be, you know, other kind of like unhealthy power dynamics happening. So yeah, we learned a lot about that, and how people kind of who are exhibiting power under kind of might use this like victim mentality to define the parameters of the group, and how that's a kind of, it's a really complicated and interesting kind of topic to talk about, because obviously we don't want to lock people in to this status of a victim, and obviously if people are, you know, using these kind of tactics, then there's definitely other things going on at play. It's like, why, it's like asking those questions of why might be power under happening? Does that mean that, you know, there's domination happening in other parts, and that's why people feel the need to react or kind of act in this way? So we learned about those two forms of coercive power, and how and why they might kind of spring up in group dynamics. And yeah, I think this is a really good quote of, we find it in our own tendencies to demonize the oppressor, in our susceptibilities to infighting and splintering, and in the imposing difficulties we repeatedly encounter in our efforts to build coalitions and to forge a kind of unity that can house multiple identities and honor the integrity of our experiences of oppression. And I think this really nicely leads into understanding collaborative power, which is, of course, like what we're all trying to work towards in our groups and in our lives as well. So similarly, there was like two different forms of collaborative power which were identified. And these are things that we're trying to optimize for. So we're trying to build spaces where these naturally kind of happen, but also put in kind of frameworks to make them happen. So power with is jointly developed and shared power that grows out of relationships and collaboration. And it's about using power for the good of the whole. And I think like these things that it's built on really struck to me, of this idea of respect, mutual support, solidarity, influence, empowerment, and collaborative decision making. And like, this is a really fantastic form of power because it multiplies individual talents and knowledge. And it's based on this idea that power is dynamic and it's not finite, so that everyone can be empowered to their maximum, rather than believing that one person has to hold all the power, only one person can hold power. And this sits really nicely with the idea of power two, which is recognizing the potential in each person to create something new and achieve goals. And yeah, I really like this quote of that power two is the unique potential of every person to shape their life and world. So this is possibilities created through individual agency. This is also giving people the chance to have power. So it might be, you know, encouraging someone to step up and take on a certain area of work, or it might be, you know, recognizing skills in someone and saying, hey, I think you could do this better than me. Or it might just be, you know, kind of handing over some of your own responsibility to empower someone else, or yeah, kind of all these different opportunities. So it's this belief that our group is stronger when everyone's kind of empowered as much as they can be. So in most social change groups, we are striving to use and build power with and power to, which are collaborative forms of shared power. And I'm going to go in now into sources of power, which was something else that we touched on during the 2 days. So there are, yeah, like kind of the different forms of power, there's different sources, so different places that power comes from. So one of these is power from within. So this is psychological. It's a person's, you know, sense of their self-worth and self-knowledge, and confidence gained from life experience, particularly overcoming and surviving difficult difficulty in challenging situations. It can also be like moral courage. So it's the power we feel speaking an uncomfortable truth or standing up for a value we believe in. So I think, that's something that a lot of people in Animal Rebellion and the groups have, that kind of that moral courage, that power to know that you don't have a view that everyone shares, but you know that it's the right thing to speak up for that. And it can also be a spiritual thing of like a deep connection with others and with nature, and also creative power. So the power that we feel singing and writing, making art, or dancing, which can also kind of feel spiritual, I guess. So power within is power that doesn't come from external forces, and it can be nurtured both inside and outside of collaborative groups. There's also, and I put that picture of the cow because I thought they looked like they had a lot of power within. I guess like the way I think of power within, it's like, that sense it's that sense of feeling grounded in yourself, and that understanding of your place or how you work, how you fit into the world, and that sense of self-worth and self-assuredness. And social power is the influence we wield among equals. So this is the power that determines how much you are listened to in a group. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how power and authority might split, because someone might be really respected and listened to, even if they don't hold kind of any formal role. And it's how much weight your opinion carries and how much respect you receive. And of course, we know some of the reasons that some people may have social power, and they're not reasons that are, they're reasons such as the country someone was born in, the language that they speak, the color of their skin, their sexuality or gender. And that's why we differentiate between earned and unearned social power. And again, like, this is not saying that one of these is inherently bad, or one of these is inherently good. It's just kind of understanding how these different forms of power kind of interplay. And I put wolves there because, if you look at wolves and a wolf pack and how they have social power and different dynamics, and how some are more respected and listened to than others, I think it's a really good example, as we are animals after all. So unearned social power is a form of power that we often talk about as privilege. So this is the power you get not from anything that you've done or created, but from who you happen to be. So this is your gender, race, social class, wealth you've inherited, and opportunities that have been handed to you. Some of these things just should be universal human rights. So things like, access to food, healthcare, education, and a decent place to live. But it can also include unfair advantages and a license in some cases to be insensitive or oblivious. And by license, I mean, like, not like you have the permission to, but it's like some people feel that entitlement, like it's the sense of never having to struggle in the world. And I think something that was really stressed was that unearned social power is often invisible when you have it, but very visible when you don't. And I think this is something that's really important to think about as well, because we did an exercise during the workshop, which was we put on the wall, we had a chart, like a sheet for each person, and it said like power from within, unearned social power, and social power. And we all went around the room and wrote on each individual's kind of sheet. And it was a really interesting and enlightening kind of experience to see how other people see you, and the power that they see that you have. We also have earned social power. And this arises when you know something or have experience in something you can share. It also is a track record of making good decisions, putting the group before your own benefit. And this is subjective. So you might have a lot of earned social power in one context and not much in another. So for example, you might be really respected at work because of, a lot of work that you've done, and, being a founder, doing the grunt work. But then you might go to another context and you might not have any earned social power. So for example, I might say that I have like earned social power at Animal Rebellion, that I'm respected and what I say kind of has some weight to it. But if you chuck me at like a football game, I have no social power at all, and no one's going to listen to a word that I say. So I think, yeah, it's subjective and it's contextual as well. And this kind of, when you bring these together with power within, this kind of brings about a concept which the author Arnold Mindell refers to as rank. So this is basically acknowledging that we don't have equal power. And in any situation, there'll be different levels of power and different kinds of power as well. So there might be someone who has a lot of unearned social power, but they have no power from within. And then there might be someone who has, a lot of earned social power, but no kind of unearned social power. And it's all like these differing levels which impact group dynamics and impact the way we communicate with each other. And when we have awareness of higher rank, or like the rank that we have, it can lessen the likelihood of using in a way that is experienced as hurtful or abusive by someone of lower rank. And having awareness of our rank helps to understand why you may feel less powerful or abused by someone with higher rank. So when we think back to this idea of like power under and this sense of powerless rage that kind of sometimes comes about, I think when we kind of take into this like an understanding of power and how different people have different levels of power, we can really kind of understand that better. And yeah, like I said before, rank is not constant. It can change from moment to moment. And becoming aware of your rank reduces your likelihood of abusing it. So if you're in a high rank situation, be aware of it and the advantage it gives you. Use these in a positive way. So this is where we can talk about things like empowering other people and using kind of your own power in a situation to open up the doors and give away, give some of that, kind of expand that power. I don't want to talk, I shouldn't use the word giving it away because power is not finite. So it's just kind of like opening the doors for other people to take their own power. And rank is neither good or bad. It just is. I don't particularly like the word rank. I think it's a funny word. It has funny associations, but I really do like the concept behind it. And also this idea that, yeah, it's not good or bad. I think sometimes we can get into a mindset of, yeah, someone has more power and they haven't done anything for it. It feels so unfair. Like I've been in situations like that where, you're in a room with someone who just can kind of say something and everyone agrees with them. And, you're like struggling to be heard and it just feels unfair. And I think it can be hard to kind of see beyond that. And what I really appreciated about the workshop was kind of developing understanding of why it feels that way, and also that that's a reality, that there are different levels of power, but what we can do is understand and work with these different kinds of power, and how we can develop practices and processes to just make the pool more open to everyone, so then kind of everyone can kind of be kind of stepping into power and stepping into responsibility and leadership. And yeah, I find that really positive and energizing. So power struggles are ubiquitous. So this means, yeah, they're always going to be there. And it's always something that will be challenging and struggling with. Rank consciousness reduces struggle universally. The purpose of world work is not to transcend, but to notice rank and use it constructively. And yeah, I really like that idea of, rather than trying to go beyond something that feels so kind of integral, it's about how do we use this constructively and how do we understand this and accept this. So as well, after learning about all these things, we also looked at kind of common pitfalls that face groups that are trying to think about power differently face, as well as some key takeaways. So we were taught about 6 key dysfunctional patterns that seem to be common in collaborative groups. So these are things that kind of crop up time and time again in groups that are trying to operate without coercive power, and kind of, yeah, things to be aware of and things to kind of think about how we can address and talk about. So these are, up on the screen, but I'll read them out anyway. So number one is that internalized oppression and learned powerness leads us to giving our power away. So this is the sense that we don't deserve power, or we're not leaders, or because, we have this sense that we're not good enough, or that we don't belong in these spaces. So that, leads to people giving power away. There's a kind of, just a second, there's kind of like ways people give power away, which I'm going to go through, which I found really interesting. Number two is that we're afraid to look at or talk about how power operates. And I think this one is so key for me. Like, I feel uncomfortable whenever the word power comes up, let alone kind of trying to understand it. But that kind of, it's kind of that whole thing of like, if you don't understand something, then you're doomed to just kind of perpetuate the worst of it. So if we're not kind of being critical and looking at this and exploring it and in our groups, then we're just kind of probably going to just replicate the same power structures that we have started these groups to avoid. Another thing is that we tend to mistake social power and rank for power over. So kind of seeing that someone is listened to and respected, and believing that that means they're using kind of coercive forms of power, instead of kind of understanding how they might have earned power, or why they might have kind of influence because of things that they've done, or a sense of power within maybe. Number four was stressed really hard for us, and I think, for very good reason, is that we tend to empower only to the midline. And what this means is basically, we have this very strong focus on lifting people up who are powerless, or who, don't have as many opportunities. And that's fantastic. But then it's almost that people get to a certain point, and then we're like, okay, you've had enough. Like, you can't go beyond that. You can't be too empowered. And that kind of leads to just limiting the potential of the whole group. So we talked a lot about how we can empower beyond the midline, and kind of let everyone kind of step into their like full potential as a leader. And I think that's a really exciting concept, and it's something that I really want to explore more of. How do we do that? How do we, create the spaces where people can be empowered, like beyond that, just like that's enough point. And we also touched on how power under is much less understood, and how we can kind of work with that and talk about that openly and honestly. And a big thing that we touched on was how do we build a healthy relationship to power? It feels like such a big topic, and it feels like such kind of a scary topic at some points, but there are some tips out there, which I'm gonna share. I think they're really useful. So one of the things we looked at was hallmarks of group sanity around power and responsibility. So this is from the Empowerment Manual, and at the end of this I have like a list of kind of further reading in that if people are interested. And these are things that groups that work well with power kind of like have in common most of the time. So these are things like having a clear structure for making decisions and agreed upon processes, clear and transparent agreements about how people gain decision-making power. So this is basically having clarity and transparency about how you earn social power in a specific group. Having a clear way for people to take on tasks and responsibilities. So it should be easy for people to step into power and take on more responsibility and step into leadership. As well as clear agreements about the scope of each member's authority to meet responsibilities. So these are things like mandates and accountabilities that we try and have in place. And clear structures of accountability. Who do people report back to? How, when, and in what form is accounting given? And obviously, like, we don't have like we're trying to move away from like hierarchy. So sometimes it can get muddled of like, does that mean that we don't have responsibility? And I think like at least for me, like when I've been in like really like teams that work really well together, it's not that it's that everyone kind of has responsibility and accountability to each other, but then there often is someone who you talk to or you report back to, and that helps kind of keep things flowing, keep things dynamic. There's also like a group culture of appreciation and thanks to those who make contributions on tasks. So rather than trying to empower owners to the midline and, kind of discourage people who take that extra step and take on leadership, kind of really having appreciation, and also a culture of tending and mutual care for those holding responsibility. So seeing people who are taking on leadership and kind of holding that and kind of giving them like what they need to kind of do that. A fair and transparent system of rewards, and training and mentoring to help people step up to new responsibilities. So if people want to, I'm going to go through in a sec some of the things that we learned about these two things. So this is how might we earn power, and then how might we give our power away. But before I kind of show you like a list that we were given, which I think is a really good list, I just wonder if people want to chuck maybe some things in the chat, maybe first around how might we earn power. So this is the whole idea of like, we, in different contexts, like there might be different ways of earning power. So what do people think are like positive ways that we should be able to earn power in animal rebellion? Work. Concise, to the point. Showing up on time. Yeah, that's a really good one. I guess what do you mean by work, Jam?
Putting in effort.
Yeah.
Obviously, like if like effort relative to like your situation. So if like I'll just use myself as an example, just because I don't want to speak for other people. Like I have a full-time job as well, but yeah, but I would say like, but you know what I mean, right? Like work and stuff and dedication.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, some really good ones in the chat. And on the kind of the flip side, how might we give our power away? And this doesn't mean like the kind of the positive sense of like empowering others. This means that sense of like feeling like that internal, I'm not good enough. So, we kind of maybe give power away. So yeah, once again, if people want to put some ideas in the chat of how we might do this. Thanks, Ben. Yep. Shouting at people, making people not like you. I think, yeah, that kind of like rage kind of thing. Having a general powerless vibe. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think I get what you mean. That sense of, oh, well, my opinion's not worthwhile, so I won't even bother saying it. Unreliable, yeah, not practicing active listening. Yeah, all really, really good ones. So I'll share the ones that we were given, which I think, like have a lot in common with what we'll put in the chat. Making bad decisions on a regular basis, celebrate, not setting expectations, and not being a team player. Yeah, really good ones. So these is kind of like a list, which you can feel free to read. I'll send out the slides afterwards. But I think there's some really good ones in there. Yeah, taking on responsibility, how earning power, taking on responsibility, helping the group function smoothly, showing good judgment, making mistakes and acknowledging them, showing compassion and forgiveness, integrity, bringing experience, skills, and training to the service of the group, mentoring and being mentored, being commitment and being on time, supporting others, solving problems, just having a good track record, like being reliable. And I think, really important for us as well is by modeling good self-care and things like that. So, I think that, some really good ones. On the other side, how might we give power away? Things like asking for permission. And I know this is something that kind of I struggle with, of that feeling like, oh, I need to ask someone if I can do this. And rather than kind of taking that initiative, expecting others to tell us what to do as well, like that sense of like distrust in yourself, and expecting others to fix things. A big one is, I think, avoiding responsibility and complaining rather than changing things. It was also expecting others to change rather than modeling behaviors we want ourselves, blaming others with higher rank, experiencing them as using power over, constraining our own power by wasting energy when we should be using to look within. So it's kind of that, using all this energy on on just being outraged at how the system is rather than like working to change it. And things like gossiping, complaining, and talking about people rather than to them. So, avoiding like using short feedback loops and that feedback process, and just kind of complaining rather than kind of trying to fix it. And obviously, like, there's some situations where you do talk to people and it goes horribly, and it's like, oh well, what was the use of that? But I think it's a really good list to kind of think about of how we might prohibit ourselves from stepping into our full power. So the final thing I'm going to touch on, and then hopefully we'll have some discussion time, is responsive leadership. So this was a kind of concept that we were presented with like kind of towards the end of the 2 days. And this was the kind of acknowledgement that all of us have the power or the potential to be leaders, and that there's ways of exhibiting and developing leadership which use like that collaborative power that we want to develop and steer away from that like coercive controlling power that we don't really want. So we were given kind of these 11 kind of dot points about like what responsive leaders often do. And this is like, some of them nurture others and see their leadership as temporary. So it's this idea that, you're not a dictator who's always going to be in charge. It's that you are leading, you're a leader at that point in time. And I think something like that I always kind of think about is like, my job is to make myself redundant. And the job of Animal Rebellion is to make itself redundant. I think that's always helped me, of this idea that if someone else gets to the point where they can do the job better or just as well, then that's the ultimate goal. Things like keeping commitments, responding, listening to others, consulting, hearing concerns, accepting criticisms, and changing. I think that's such a really good one. Taking responsibility for decisions they make and hold themselves accountable. Keep lines of authority, power, decision making clear and visible. So this is the idea of transparency. So not kind of making decisions behind closed doors, or not kind of sharing what they know, and making that really visible and clear. And thinking first about the interests and needs of the group and giving them priority. I think there's this one, which I think is a really interesting number 7, of not expecting special benefits, but expecting support and nurturing from the group. And I think that's a really important one, because we don't want to build a culture, I think, where leaders just run themselves to the ground and then disappear. Like, we want to build a culture where people ask for the support that they need. So number 8 is do not play king. So not abusing and humiliating others. Number 9 is self-disclosing. So expressing feelings and vulnerability and giving support as well. So creating this culture that we want to see, and not monopolizing caring or caregiving. So of course we want to empower everyone, and we want to kind of just create a space where everyone can step up and be cared for and also give care. And I think like the final one is something that's really important to me. And I think the best leaders that I've seen do make mistakes and they acknowledge them, and then they don't do them again. They learn from them. And I think, so often it feels so scary to make mistakes, and I think it's so important. So finally, we have some key takeaways. And these were kind of, like right at the end of the workshop, given as kind of a summation of some useful things that we can take away. So this is: power is not negative. It is helpful, and it is a necessary resource and capacity. Number 2 is a hard one, I think, and it was presented to us as a hard one, of we will never be equal. We will never have equal power. Like, obviously we're striving for a world of like justice and equality and equity, and but I think, at least at this moment, I think probably forever, we'll never be in a situation where every being on the planet has equal power. That's why that kind of understanding and working with power is so important. we need to talk about power. We need to be aware of it, and we need to use it wisely. Power is dynamic, not fixed. And this is back to the whole thing of the different, I might have a lot of power in one situation and no power in another. Power is not a zero-sum game. One person having power doesn't mean that other people have less. It's not finite. It's not a finite resource. We need to recognize and support each other to overcome our conditioning around power. Because, a lot of us, I think the majority of us, have grown up with coercive power being the norm. And when we're trying to transition to using, power with and power to, it's hard, and there's a lot of baggage, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma, and that's something we need to recognize and, understand. We need to nurture power with, power to, and power from within. And we need to take and support leadership. And I think I really like this one because it says, we need to take and support leadership. So we need to step into our own capacity to be leaders, and don't and recognize how we might give power away and try and stop doing that, I guess. I think number 9 is power and responsibility need to be balanced. And this kind of ties to the idea that when someone has power and no responsibility, that can be really unhealthy for a group. And it sucks to have responsibility and no power. So we need to see where those kind of dynamics are cropping up and think about how we can address that. So think about how we can maybe approach someone who has a lot of power and isn't taking responsibility, and have a conversation with them about, the damage that might be doing to the group and other people. And also find those people who are taking on responsibility but don't have power, and think about, why is that and how we can address that. Yes, exactly. Spider-Man, why do we even do these workshops? We should just be watching Spider-Man. And ultimately, we want everyone to maximize their power beyond the midline. We want everyone to kind of be the fullest extent of their power and step into kind of the leader that they can be. And what's happening at Animal Rebellion to build a healthy relationship to power? So after the workshop, where the last thing we did at the workshop is we identified some things that we could start working on, some projects and things like that, which might start to develop the relationship to power that we want to see. So you might have seen me posting about this idea of a strategy retreat in July. So that's something that I'm working on at the moment, which for me is a way of starting to kind of make more transparent how decisions are made and how we make decisions as a group, and how we kind of form and organize as a group. So yeah, I'd really would love it if people come to that. Not to do a plug or anything. We're also doing some work on the strategy team mandate as well, which makes it more explicit and transparent about how people get involved, and who makes decisions about strategy. And yeah, and this is maybe something that other groups, other circles might want to work on as well, of trying to make those ways people earn power really transparent. So yeah, there's work being done on a buddy system to kind of embed this idea of mentoring and being mentored, as well as a feedback process. So this is, how we give and receive feedback at Animal Rebellion. And there's also work being done on kind of creating clarity around processes and decision making. So this will include a centralized location, where the existing processes that we have are held. So everyone kind of knows the ways that we've maybe decided to work with Animal Rebellion, and everyone can kind of have access to that. So yeah, that's me done. So yeah, I'm really keen to hear from people about what sparked for them, what they found interesting. Yeah, anything. So we have a bit of time to discuss now. So I will stop sharing my screen.
That was really good, Holly. I'll say that.
And if no one has anything to discuss, that's fine as well.